The session is called Close Allies in Emerging Technology, Innovating and Fighting Together. This is a very unusual panel that you're going to experience here in the next hour. We've got a group of folks here that are looking forward to sharing their experiences with you as we go through the session. I'm Mike Warlick. Some of you know me. I'm the Vice President for Defense for AFC International, and it's an honor to stand before you and welcome you to this panel and also to the event this week, which is looking to be very satisfactory to everybody involved. We hope while you're here that you're visiting the booths that are out there, that you're listening to the sessions that we're hosting, and that you're just really enjoying the camaraderie of all this as we put COVID potentially in our rearview mirror as we go forward from here. What I'm going to do this morning is try to help out the introductions, and I'll do this fairly quickly as you'll get to meet our participants as we go along. We've got some on the stage and we've got some on the front row here as well. So first of all, I'd like to introduce our panel that's seated. We'll start from my left, going to your right. Colonel Elliot Schroeder, Commanding Officer, U.S. Army 75th Innovation Division, Southern California, and Hawaii and Nevada area. Lois Nicholson, Counselor, Defense Acquisition and Technology. Lieutenant Colonel Bruce Gilks, Canadian Army retired, Senior Business Development Manager, VisWork. And Joanne Smell, Senior Trade Investment Commissioner, Minister Counselor, Commercial Australian Trade. So there's a very diverse group. Other participants that are with us this morning, I don't think Marv Langston has shown up. If he has, raise his hand. Marv, thank you, I got you. PhD, Principal Langston Associates LLC. We also have Commander Derek Powles, RN, Assistant Naval Attaché on the British Naval Staff, Royal Navy. And Rear Admiral James Rodman, U.S. Navy retired, CEO, Excite LLC, Investment Commission, Austrade. I think I covered everybody. Did I miss a couple? I got you covered? All right, great. Okay, with those introductions done, and you'll get to hear from them as we go along. The moderator of this morning's session is Scott Tate, which is right behind me on my right. Scott's the Executive Director of the National Security Innovation Catalyst located at the University of California, UC San Diego. A goal of Catalyst is to improve the linkages and information flow between San Diego's national security community, entrepreneurial companies with dual-use technologies, academia, investors, and policy decision makers of our close allies. Scott served in the U.S. Navy for 27 years. His assignments included a position leading strategy, policy, and innovation. He's doing that now. Efforts working with senior leaders in Indo-Pacific region, as well as leaders within the Washington, D.C. area. You can sense, based on his government experience and the panel that we have today, what you're going to experience over the next 50 minutes or so. Scott, welcome aboard.
Thanks very much, Mike. Thank you to FCA for organizing an incredible program this week and for the introductions. Thank you to our panel. I think you are about to see the most diverse panel that's on the docket for the entire week, not only because of their national affiliations, but the fact that every single one of our panelists today comes from a mixed background of government, military, and industry. Every single one of them has had at least two, and at least half of them have had 3 different careers in industry, government, or active duty military. So you're getting a range of perspectives that you're not likely to hear anywhere else here at FCA. Thanks also to you, the audience, for joining us, because we are well aware that this conference has many good offerings, and you've chosen to spend an hour with us, so we appreciate it. The topic of the panel today is relevant to the theme of the entire week. Are we moving fast enough? Are we pacing emerging threats? Are we doing the right things? And I think the reason that we're here to talk today is because there's a shared sense that we are not. And not only aren't we, but we probably can't on our own. We have to work together. We have to get back into the habits of combined operations with close allies if we want to succeed in these new challenges. You know, we've been playing junior varsity for a couple of decades here, and it's time to get back into the big leagues. And none of us can do that unless we sharpen our steel with partners. So without further ado, we're going to get on with what you all came to see, which is them talking, not me. The full bios are all on the website if you'd like to look any of us up, and contact info is freely available. So first off, I'd like to ask Lois Nicholson, now, in your opinion, what are the most important emerging technologies in maintaining the national security strengths that we need in order to deal with these emerging threats?
Well, good morning, everybody, and it's fantastic to be here today. I work in the British Embassy in Washington, D.C., and I'm a member of the UK Ministry of Defence, so perspective from me. I think what I would say to that question is, firstly, the way to tackle global threats and challenges is making use of the opportunities that we've got for international collaboration, and I'm sure we'll be talking about that collectively this morning. The UK has the largest defence budget in Europe, and marry that alongside the US defence budget, the largest in the world. I think you've got in there a sense of we can really do business here. The UK itself has sort of set out its stall. We had an integrated review last year which talked to strategic advantage through science and technology. So technology and innovation go hand in hand, so there is an absolute opportunity there, and I know our Prime Minister Johnson is very keen to make sure that the UK becomes a superpower in science and technology. It always has been. I think we probably have been a little bit silent in a few years, but if you look at where the UK has been and its alliance with the US on technology, it goes back decades, it goes back a century. Think the Second World War, think radar, think many of those other emerging technologies that our forebears worked on and got in the hands of the user. So I think we've got history there. I think what I would say is, though, for me, it's not just about technology. What it is for me is about what challenges you are facing and how can technology fill those challenges. So the joint staffs have got a process which says threat-informed, concept-driven capability development. So my challenge is, what can we do with technologies to meet those capability challenges? If I had to talk about technologies, of course I talk about AI, of course I talk about autonomy, biotechnology, quantum, all of those sort of things, but there's many others which will be bubbling up and emerging. So I think one thing I would leave this part of the question is actually it's all about capability edge rather than technology edge.
Well put. Thank you very much. So Joanne, you come at this from a slightly different take with a background in government and industry and from down under rather than from top over, looking at a very different part of the world. Could we have your views on it?
Absolutely, thanks Scott. And before I share my views, thanks Lois, and I'm pleased to see that the fact that we're women on this panel is the least interesting element of diversity for this discussion today. It is really a great panel, and thank you for putting it together, Scott. So a bit like Lois, I'm probably more inclined to talk about the how versus the what. Obviously, all of the actual emerging technologies that we're seeking to develop are fairly publicly available. AI, quantum, cyber. For Australia, hypersonics is pretty important. That's not I think the story here, Scott. I think the story is really about how we use the tech, and ultimately what we need is emerging technology that enables human-machine partnership, so that we can understand the operational environment, we can manoeuvre and project force. And there are so many technologies that can enable us to do that across all sorts of domains. When I think about it, it's really data that's our currency in this day and age, and that is prolific. And so the main emerging technologies are really around sensing, information fusion, and dissemination. But what I want to start seeing more of a discussion about is the human-centered design component of emerging technologies. And this is something that's been common in industry for decades now. HCD is embedded in all industry innovation, and it's really driven by needs. And in this context, the needs are really for decision making and for attack capability. So all of the technologies that are being developed really need to have that central force. And the second part they always need to be successful is fit for purpose. And in this context, that means being curated and in a timely way. So I think that's part of the challenge with the emerging technology sector, is that it's an ocean of opportunities. It's how do we actually put those technologies and those capabilities in humans' hands in order to drive those two capabilities of decision making and attack. So that's how I would frame that question, Scott.
No, thank you very much. Do you want to?
You guys hear me?
It should be good.
Should be good now. All right, I got it. Joanne makes a good point about the human-machine interface, and if you look at the West's problem is that the West is a fraction of the world's population, and anywhere we go, we're going to be outnumbered. So it's going to take a lot of machines to deal with that deficit in numbers against large countries and deploy to other areas where numerically we just have a disadvantage, and more numerical advantage is always everything. So working on that human-machine interface is going to be critical for where we're going, and fortunately we're at that time where technologies get to that point where machines, more than even during the Industrial Revolution and how that impacted things, can actually be much more of a player in combat, such as with AI making decisions, with drones actually doing engaging targets without having our own human forces being engaged. It really sets a tone where the machines will be doing a lot of the dirty work that the humans will be directing, and that's kind of the transition where things are going.
Thank you, Colonel Schroeder. So it's an interesting commonality here that it's not about tech only. Tech is interesting, but the capabilities and the outcome are fascinating, and the pairing. So what you're describing sounds like something that is that we are uniquely bad at developing inside of governments. So where do we see leadership in this combined tech-human capability field taking place? Will it be startups? Will it be industry? Will it be government? Will it be military? Would you like to continue your thoughts?
Yeah, so definitely the energy is with the small startups.
I don't think you're on. Can you hear him in the back?
Talk about tech. Is it working? All right. You guys hear me back there? Thanks. So the energy is obviously with the small startups. We hear every day of new technologies just emerging from all these companies that you never heard of before. However, what we're seeing, especially with my position with the Innovation Command, is that the small startups are very innovative. They can fail fast. They have the funding. They're less risk averse than the larger industries, but they don't have total commonality with what we need. You're not seeing a hypersonic missile being developed in a garage, thank God. There are certain priorities, like you're not going to get aircraft carriers, you're not going to get anything, but what you are getting is that it's creating that innovation culture that as we set up other agencies that try to mimic what's going on in the civilian sector, that it's actually creating energy in the traditional side of acquisition, in the bureaucracy side, in the primes, to be more innovative and to be less risk averse and trying to incorporate new methodologies for developing new technologies. So the small sector is not going to solve it for us, but they are setting the tone for how we need to go with innovation and war fighting and where we're going with all our threats that are out there now.
Thank you. And Bruce, where Elliot comes at it from the point of a startup CEO and a military officer, you have experience in exactly the other realms, well, military also, but kind of small, big industry with very big industry. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I've worked in all of these areas, really, and in my opinion, innovation always comes from the edge, not from the center. So you need to have access to startups for the good ideas, but then these good ideas need to be integrated. And for that, you need a combination of the larger primes and military folks to glue the whole thing together to something that's useful. One of the other, an example of this is information, right? So everybody's getting a lot of information. How is it being synthesized, understood, used, and applied? These are some of the challenges that we have. So, as an ex-military guy, I'm a battalion commander or something, I'm not going to be able to figure that out. I'm going to have to rely on a defense prime to give me an integrated system. in order for them to give me an integrated system, there has to be good new technology. Like there's the old joke, delivering yesterday's technology tomorrow. You know, that's kind of what's been going on the last while. We need to speed this up and get these technologies integrated, tested, and in the front line. And I think rapid iteration is probably the key to that.
That's very interesting, thank you. We could do a whole nother panel on defense consolidation and what happens when small companies get bought by big ones. But so it's interesting that we've already evolved kind of a common approach to this. Now, how do we think we can collaborate better on this approach from each of our national perspectives to break down some of the barriers? Because what I'm hearing is the old model that we evolved, say, during the Cold War, where most of the time our nations were harvesting their national strengths and then sharing at the government level. For us to pace emerging threats the way that we're describing here on the panel, it's going to have to be collaboration equally powerful at every level. And that's going to be difficult to do. Joanne, you have a particularly interesting background with this regard. Your thoughts, please.
I'd love to, thank you. I mean, really what we're talking about is moving from statements of policy into practicalities. And it's a pretty long road to travel. Just by way of background, I'm not involved in policy setting. I'm definitely involved in policy advocacy. Whether I'm in the government or in the private sector, it's always been about the practicalities. How do we actually take that statement of intent and convert it into some sort of operational battle rhythm? And despite the fact we've got NTIB, the Quad, AUKUS, Five Eyes, Close Allies, whatever you want to call our intention, our processes still slow us down. So given this is a really increasingly acute problem in our region, you know, I've given it some thought, and you know, I do think that there are ways in which we can increase that cooperation on a practical level. I think from a bottoms-up point of view, there does seem to be great allegiance between the S&T divisions, the innovation units of Close Allies, but I would like to see them collaborate in a more formalised way. Perhaps it's some sort of community of practice where there's some structures put around the sharing of plans, the sharing of resources. Our S&T department has set its strategy for the next 10 years, and the framework that it is following, I think, could be adopted more broadly, and that is threefold. It's really about focus, scale, and impact. And so from a focus point of view, I think this community of practice could be focused, could take a number of common challenges to focus on, the hardest problems that mean the most to everybody, and start convening around similar priorities. From a scale point of view, what they're doing is looking at involving not just other divisions in the Defence Department, but looking at industry, business, research, and so that could be amplified by the community of practice equally taking that broad scale and inclusiveness approach. And then the way in which they intend to develop emerging technologies is really around impact, and so testing those technologies against military utility iteratively, rather than creating something that's finished and then is ta-da, and all of a sudden it doesn't necessarily meet the current, let alone emerging needs. So that could be a bit of a framework that might apply from a bottoms-up point of view. Then you always need the top-down. In industry, we have a term that says, the fish always rots from the head, and that means that the leadership has to encourage the type of innovation ecosystem for the players to be able to play together. So, we do have treaties and frameworks and MOUs, but they always seem to take about 18 months or longer to develop. Yep. Could there be some form of a template that's agreed by this community of practice that addresses those critical aspects of governance, but is a sort of a form factor that, when there is an opportunity to cooperate, then a lot of that heavy lifting has already been done. And added to that, it's not just about processes and systems. Even in industry, all of this usually comes back to culture and the humans that are working together, and the incentives that are put in place, the information sharing mechanisms. So, this is not just a sort of a hard problem, it's also very much a soft problem too.
So you're advocating for the F-35 model? No? Oh, sorry. Captain Quinn, from somebody as an attaché in our Pentagon having to see this every day, do you have additional thoughts on what levels we might best cooperate at?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is, most nations can't go alone. Especially the smaller four of the Five Eyes, right? And so we all have financial limits. We all have strengths and weaknesses. So in a previous job, I was the commanding officer of our Maritime Warfare Center in Halifax, and we had niches that we were very, very good at. Other nations had other niches that they were very, very good at. And we had what was called the Maritime Warfare Center Forum, where we met twice a year, and we each had our own little piece of the pie where we focused our effort on. Some was on Harpoon, some was on SM2. It was more tactics as opposed to S&T, but the same model that applies. And every year we could get together. We had MOUs between nations that allowed sharing at a very high classification level, which is key to success in this, by the way. That's the biggest barrier we have, is the ability to exchange information. And we made amazing strides. And everyone benefited from the work of everybody else. So that's the kind of model I think we need to do. When it comes to where does the effort and the cooperation have to happen, it has to happen at the working level and at the higher level. I mean, you can't do one without the other. I mean, I think everyone will agree that, major innovation is going to come from the working level. That's where the results are going to be. That's where the smart brains are. However, if you make a widget that I don't need, then it's wasted effort and time, and we can't do that either, right? So there's got to be, I think, a close cooperation at the working level, but there also has to be a close at the strategic level. Quite frankly, that's where the dollars are. Right, so if you want to get $1 in Canada towards a project, it's got to be tied to our defense policy, strong, secure, and engaged. If it's not one of those line items, you're not going to be funded. And so you can have all the great ideas you want, but without the money, it's not going to go anywhere. That rolls into what we have in Canada is our defense strategic areas. So we have a bunch of focus areas. So we're not. We have DRDC that does all the S&T for the armed forces. So we don't have an Army bin, a Navy bin, an Air Force bin. The categories are broader: personnel, command and control. And so we try to take advantage of synergies that Army and Navy will both use together. And then when it comes to actual platforms and weapons, and there's diversion then. But if you don't get linked into the money in the end, then the good ideas aren't going to help us. So you need that close tie-in, I think.
Thank you. So what I'm hearing is kind of technology operations and human elements of this all have to be combined at all levels for it to be successful. It's been hard for us to collaborate just in technology stovepipes. If we got to do it across all of them, there must be significant international barriers between our nations for those linkages that may be well formed in some areas but not in others. Lois, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do. Thanks, Scott. I don't think of things as barriers. I think of things, where do we have the opportunity, and then what are the challenges and risks? And of course, looking internationally, we've got strong alliances, whether that be Five Eyes, NATO, and many others. And I think those are the things which will bind us together to develop systems and capabilities so we can address the threats that we face. I think one aspect of Joanne there was talking about industry. There are strong alliances already. I will mention the F-35 word here. That is an international program. The UK itself provides innovative technologies. Over 100 companies involved in that. We have 50% of the F-35, each F-35 by value. So the alliances and the industry input, from my mind, it just doesn't live on this continent. It doesn't live in Europe. It doesn't live in the southern seas. We have to bind together our industries, and that's the opportunity. But it's also, a barrier. Ways of getting at that, of course, the National Technology and Industrial Base. Joanne just referred to that. Getting at things such as critical minerals and materials, looking at how cyber security standards can be harmonized so we don't have to qualify in one country and then qualify again, a real issue for very small companies. And also getting at how we look at foreign direct investment and how the threats to our companies. If I did have to give some challenges and barriers though, I'd say several. One of those is about how agile our procurement systems are. The panel just behind us, which I think is just ending, was talking to our absolute point. We're not agile if we are not moving at the pace of relevance of the technology. And I think all our nations are struggling and trying to think of ways of getting technology quickly into the hands of the user. I'd also, both Bill and Joe have alluded to project arrangements and getting the formal ability to share information. It sounds bureaucratic. It is bureaucratic, and coupled with that, export control barriers are there. We're looking with the UK, with Australia and Canada to lower those. But in some ways, if we're not careful, we are doing more harm to ourselves than to the enemies and the threats we face. I think the final thing I would say is, what COVID has said to us is, our supply chains are not as resilient as we would want them to be, and that is a risk. And I think what we need to do as we move forward is also to look at how, in particular in the emerging tech areas, how those companies, those niche companies are protected so that they can flourish and deliver the technologies we want. UK is getting about it. We just introduced the National Security and Investment Act, which will allow us to intervene on transactions to make sure that those companies are protected from any form of investment which doesn't appear to be supporting the national perspective. So if I was to say there's opportunities and risks, some bureaucratic, but some actually making sure our industry can actually work together and thrive.
Thank you. Marv, you've had to deal with this both at very high levels of the U.S. government and now actively in industry. Do you have additional thoughts?
Well, maybe I can be a little less polite about it. I think we have big barriers. I think the barriers come from two primary things. We have, as we all know, military systems that are controlled by civilian representatives of our governments. So what that immediately sets up is a political structure. So what we have in all of our countries is we've now gotten to the point where the technologies that are the driving military technologies are produced by our industrial bases, which need to be supported, and our politicians make sure they need to be supported, so they make sure the contracts go to those people. Happens in our foreign country allies as well. I mean, we have had programs, like was mentioned, one of them that happened a long time ago was the MIDS program, where we had all of the allies working together to produce a piece of a radio, which took us about 20 years. So obviously if you're producing a radio in 20 years, that's not the right answer. So the other thing that's happening nowadays, I actually forgot what I was going to say about the other thing, so I'll let it go at that. But I think that we have barriers that are not easy to overcome, and yet we have technologies that are transforming the way the world works. I'm thinking of things like Starlink, which is putting up 42,000 satellites over our heads, which is going to connect every dot on the planet to every moving thing on the planet. Those radical changes actually are opportunities for us to cross nation states and bring ourselves together. Oh, the second thing I was going to say about our barriers is our military folks would all like to work together. They do work together. Our industry folks would work together, but we can't get past the acquisition structures that cause us to be pulled back into the political domain.
Thank you, Marv. Colonel Schroeder, do you want to?
Yeah, I think
add on?
Marvin Lois bring up a good point. The other part is the messaging of it, because it is tax dollars, and militaries are a matter of national pride, and to have them work together, we all understand it. Tech does, military does, even people in the tech government civilian side, but the populace doesn't understand it, and we don't know who exactly owns the message and say, hey, this is a good thing to do, because as we know, foreign aid's unpopular. Spending money other places besides your own home is not popular. So who's going to own the messaging and get that messaging out is going to be a question that we're going to have to deal with in the future.
Yeah, excellent point. So when we look at collaboration and the modalities that might be needed for that, one that suggests itself was the Nato approach during the Cold War, which was kind of standardization and specialization, where certain countries took the lead in developing certain types of technologies and applying them in certain domains, and to the greatest extent possible, we standardized across all our nations so that we could mutually support each other. Do we think that might be a model that is applicable to this situation as well, or not? Admiral Rodman, you are still doing a lot of work jointly and across countries. What are your thoughts, sir?
Yeah, so Thanks again, Scott. So, look, standardization's been around for a long time. I see a couple of people in the audience who benefit. Linda Newton's here from the old Pack Fleet. Matt Jankowski, he's an old E2C driver. Mar brought up MIDS, right? MIDS is an example of where standardization has actually benefited the force in a great way. And you can pull other examples like GPS and SATCOM are really good examples of that. And the NATO standardization, that question is, as we move into this, brave new future where these technologies are evolving very quickly, does that thing still has legs? I would argue standardization is a double-edged sword, right? The double-edged sword on the positive side is, that it encourages efficiency, right? It allows folks to develop to a standard, but the downside of it is sometimes it unnaturally extends a product's life cycle where, if I'm an innovator and I look at that standard and my thing doesn't meet that standard, I may say, well, yeah, my thing is way better than that other thing that follows that standard, but I'm not going to put any money into it because I know I'm kind of fighting against a fortified hill with the standard. So we have to kind of be careful about how we use those standards, and I think standards do have a future, but only when they're put in place at the right time in the maturity level of that innovation's life cycle to allow it to do. And we've got to be on guard to not allow standards to stifle innovation. We won't win the future fight, I think, unless we have it. So a few caveats on the standardization approach. Number one is, and I think it's been said here, right, we can't let IP this showstopper amongst our nations. Often I think we rely back on IP protection and the economic models that foster it to say, hey, I'm not going to share that more broadly with other folks because I'm worried about the economic sovereignty of my nation. We kind of have to get away from that model, and I think there's plenty of ways to do it. Second thing is, a lot of these technologies are being developed in the commercial, with commercial applications. And what we ought to be doing is we ought to be standing behind commercial standards as much as possible. And where a commercial standard doesn't exist, we damn well better be leading the world in developing that standard, because if we don't, somebody who we don't like will, to our disadvantage. The leader-follow model, is that still applicable? Well, we're all sitting here today because we're all COVID vaccinated. And it's interesting to note that none of our nations actually follow same model with regard to how that vaccine was developed. The United States used two different technologies, mRNA and vector vaccines. The United Kingdom and the European Union used a different model. But boy, we went from no vaccine to a vaccine in less than a year, right? So that just goes to show that had we said, oh, no, we're going to wait, we're going to follow a leader thing, we'll let one country figure it out, and then then everybody else will follow behind, none of us would be sitting here today, right? So that's a great example of how you can use innovation to your advantage. And for those of you who don't who want to read a really good book, Carl Ulrich from the Wharton School at University of Pennsylvania wrote a great book on innovation. He's probably the leading voice in the world on open innovation. And what Ulrich said was that really great ideas, Six Sigma, really exceptional ideas, are really hard to find. And the only way to find them, since ideas are normally distributed, is to increase the total number of ideas that you consider at large, and then have the right filters to figure out which ones are really exceptional. We're cutting our nose to spite our face if we don't collectively get together and figure out how to solve this problem by allowing us to create innovation all across our industrial bases so that we find those exemplary ideas, which at some point will mature and then could potentially become a standard, but we got to do that. Hey, folks, bluff bottom line is we're in the fight of our lives, and our nations represent the voice of freedom around the world. And we got to get, as Dr. Langston said, we got to get our act together so that we can keep it going.
Thank you, Admiral. Damien, your background should give you a fairly interesting perspective on this. Would you be willing to share it?
Sure, not a problem. Damien Tyrrell from Sentient Vision Systems, Australian AI software company. Generally in a panel, you like to have someone who's going to agree and challenge the status quo. Unfortunately, this is an echo chamber. We all agree that you have to break down those barriers. Was NATO in World War II a great model? It was at the time. Is it applicable now? No. Industry innovates, and government and defence actually create the need, and they actually deploy that. So they need to be heavily involved. But to do that, you need to actually still have the processes and the mechanisms to enable that type of environment to flourish. Otherwise, it just withers on the vine. It's a great idea. And technology for technology's sake is actually a waste. And so government is actually needed. You kind of need to hold our hand a bit as we go down that path together, but allow us the freedom, give us some rope to show you different ways to do things. Not all of them will be applicable, but at least be open to the conversation, and ultimately this thing out of all of this is break down those barriers. We've heard it from every single panel member. Break down the barriers, make it faster, not exactly a skunk work, but create the environment that fosters innovation and the deployment of new technologies. I'll give a small example. Who here actually knows that AI has been on the battlefield since about 2010? Australian company, and it's used by the Allies very effectively and has been used 24/7 since then. That wasn't a standard that was, it was an opportunity that was seen. There's a tool in the toolbox, and actually just reached into the toolbox and took that one and applied it. And there's no standardization for that, but it's been extremely effective. And I think going forward, we're going to see a little bit more of that standardization, which comes to the point that you were talking about and yourself. The lead follow, we get to a particular point and yep, we actually have enough information, we understand how that's going to be a benefit, but we have to then standardize it. So standardize at a particular point, not right at the start. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Damien. Very much appreciated. So, over the last 5 or 10 years, most of our nations have created new organizations that have innovation somewhere in their title, that are supposedly around to help break down these barriers and move technology faster into national security service. In your opinion, which of those have been most successful, or have any of them been successful? Are they currently incentivized to work across the alliance rather than just internally? And if not, is there a way that we might encourage them to do so? Lois, would you be willing to jump on that?
Yeah, I would, and I would say, like in every other nation, the UK has its own strategy for innovation and its priorities for innovation, but one of the strap lines for that is innovation is for everybody. Everybody who works in defence, whether they be in defence, headquarters, in our single services and industry, innovation is for everybody. It's not just a niche sport. But we've had some really good successes. Some of you might have heard of our Defence and Security Accelerator, a unit set up 2016. Since then it's had a number of calls. Over 5,000 companies have submitted proposals, 20% have been taken forward, and we've spent in that time about $250 million trying to get technologies matured and into the hands of the warfighter. Working with allied colleagues, the US Navy, Admiral Morley, alongside our second Sea Lord, stood up about 18 months ago the London Tech Bridge, and that is trying to get at innovative technologies from a UK and European base. With the Space Force, the UK's partnered in International Pitch Day, and that's pulled in a number of units from the US, including the Defence Innovation Unit, our own DASA, our individual services innovation units. And from what I can gather on that day, you turn up. It's called Dragon's Den in the UK. I'm not sure what it's called here in the US, but basically you pitch. 15 companies pitched, 10 companies were selected, and they were given a check at the end of the day. So we are really getting at it, and that's a good example of international collaboration. And then, of course, we can use the assets we have for experimentation. So many of you will be aware that the UK's just had its maiden voyage of its flagship Queen Elizabeth aircraft carrier, with US Marine Corps F-35s embarked alongside our own, just come back from the South China Sea. Great vision of tilt to the Indo-Pacific and allies and partners working together. We have her sister ship, called the Prince of Wales. A little bit of a unique British nuance there, but the sister ship called Prince of Wales, she's coming over later this year. We will be doing experimentation on them, on her. She'll be standing up F-35 trials, but we will be doing experimentation. And then if we turn to the Indo-Pacific, we have two offshore patrol vessels constantly there, and they will be also deployed to do experiments with technology, because we cannot and must not get behind the game. And these platforms, as working platforms, are the opportunity, as well as, for example, the innovation units I've talked to.
Thank you. It's encouraging to hear there's some success. Elliot, you live inside of one of these and have been chartered to do a lot of these things. Your thoughts?
Yeah, so the Army's approach, and when you look at the Army is not a platform-based service like the Navy or the Air Force, so it's always been human-based, and it's about getting equipment to the soldiers. So we've been not so much as an innovation culture as opposed to applying the innovations that are out there, but we're changing that. We have Army's Futures Command set up, and my unit's the Innovation Command, which is actually a reserve unit where the Army realized that, hey, we can't pull all these infantry company commanders or these guys that have been leading troops all over the place. They don't know what's going on in the tech sector, so they took us out of the reserves that work in the tech sector and say, hey, these guys are in the reserves, they're working for us part-time, but they also have their foot in the tech sector and they know what's going on. So they created our unit to support Army Futures Command, and what's come out of there is we are now much more innovation focused. We realigned with our cross-functional teams, and the biggest event is the Project Convergence, which Army's Future Command has in Yuma they did last year, where they have a lot of technology sectors come out there and demonstrate their technology to get the motivation and influence behind it and get into the DevComs. But we've also seen on the defense side with the the proliferation of the suffix works. You have AFWorks, SoftWorks, ERDIC works. There's a ton of works out there. That seems to be attracting a lot of new technologies, but a lot of people like to point and say, well, I don't see the next gen vehicle come out of there. I don't see the new aircraft coming out of there. Like I mentioned earlier, this is actually creating that innovation culture that needs to happen in the military. The military used to do its own way, one way. We had the acquisition cycle, we wait till it gets put on us, and now we're going to go and do it. So these small startup things are the beginning of the innovation that's happening in this sector. As far as working with the allies, I know it's been strong with the platform services with the Air Force and the Navy, the F-35, and the nuclear subs Australia. But on the Army side, Army's still, mainly because it is a human-centric organization, still believes in the old strategy. I was just looking at the Army strategy, reviewing it again last night, and it's mainly about letting the other countries develop their capabilities and work in concert with them. I'm not necessarily that's the right approach, but I think it's just because the Army's really trying to get its foot around innovation as well, or foot in innovation and developing new technologies and then working with partners from there. So there's a lot needs to be done in innovation. Innovation's a never-ending story. We'll always have to innovate. We always have been. But the Army's now fully committed to the innovation and what it needs for winning land battles in the future, and our allies are key to that in all cross domains.
Scott,
That's great. Thank you.
Scott, could I just
Sure,
build on
please.
both Lois? What's been said so far is Australia actually was able to participate in the US Air Force pitch day that was held at Farnborough, which wasn't Farnborough because of COVID, but that was an awesome experience in seeing that even though the US and the UK had contractually set up that that cooperation, they were still very open to any close alliances to participate in that program, and one of our Australian companies was able to win one of those early contracts, and the lovely part about it is that it's paid on the day, and all the hard work's done before the pitch day rather than after the pitch day, and that's an awesome entry for any small business, because it starts to become possible to sole source if you have got something that is unique and required. We also are on the mailing list for the Defence Innovation Unit, sending us solicitations. I've got someone in my team that's in the audience, and he's turning them around as quickly as possible to respond to those needs. Another member of my team in the audience who coordinates really closely with the Foreign Comparative Test Office. We've run virtual showcases, in-person showcases, and again, just I suppose my point being is that in this ecosystem, if I can pitch that commercial service that's positioned between government and industry. I come from Austrade, and that's where we sit. We're a government agency that faces out to business. These are the teams that are actually building the bridge between the military and the private sector, and they do a really important role in making these practicalities come to life.
And Scott, with Canada, we're actually doing some stuff. We shamelessly borrowed a program from the UK. It's called Ideas. Also, Nato has been doing pitch sessions as well, and VisWorks actually participated in one of these for, I think it was space situation awareness. And there's also one other innovation, which is micro procurement in Canada. So these are very, very small contracts that are set aside, like $15,000 that's set aside for a small task for a small company. And so it allows them to get their feet wet and kind of understand the defense market. Because you're coming at it kind of from two positions of ignorance. They don't know the defense market, we don't know the tech. So it's a good way to bring it together quickly and without a bunch of fuss.
Sure.
Yeah. Bruce and Joanna bring up a good point about not just organizations, but contract vehicles like CIBRs and OTAs that have been very successful. If you guys haven't been following the defense budget, they actually are trying to tighten down on some of the OTAs, which this is not the Army talking, this is me talking. I don't think that's a good approach. But we know how things are when it's the taxpayer dollars. People have eyes on things. But those sort of have been some of the biggest wins of getting non-traditional companies into the defense ecospace and providing their technology. So you guys do a lot of great work on that. And so those public-private partnerships are really doing a lot for innovation.
That's terrific. Thank you. So it sounds like there's a lot going on already, little pockets of success. If we bring it back up to the strategic level for a minute to close out, an underlying theme of all of the talk so far has been this reemergence of great power competition and a decoupling of the world both politically and economically, and sort of a calcification back into a sphere that is more autocratic leaning and then one that is more democratic and capitalist leaning. As that decoupling happens, do we think it gives us a natural advantage, or does it give our adversaries a natural advantage? Or is it a draw? Joanne?
Yeah, sure. Just wish that the alliance of the autocracies could steal our bureaucracy, not just our technology. I think the hardest problems tend to be solved by sort of the smallest but most diverse groups of people. I think we've probably all been part of something in our, even in our family life or in our work life, where you get the right people coalescing around the problem, you usually get a really good solution. And you see that in these defence innovation units, the term more broadly, that they are usually smaller, they're diverse. Same as SMEs, or small to medium enterprises. So if I think of the term SME as being not private sector or public sector, it's just an enterprise that is small to medium, that is where the ideas are able to flourish, where there aren't those encumbered processes and governance systems. So I think we do have the advantage. The democratic alliances are generating more of these SMEs, whether it be in the private or public sector. And so that means our combined forces are, bigger than theirs, which means that our sources of ideas are bigger than theirs. Really, I think the mission is cooperation. That's what the mission is right now.
Absolutely. Bruce?
Yeah, I think that one of the big things that'll help us out, first of all, these potential adversaries are frenemies. We still have to listen to them and understand them and learn from them as much as we possibly can. Because, intent can change overnight, but while we still have access, we need to learn as much as we can and see where they're going and stuff. Because we have to focus on capability, and capability takes years and years, whereas intent can change in an instant. And so while we have the opportunity, we have to learn. The other thing is communications and security challenges between us as allies. So we need to break down these barriers and allow better cooperation. If we were doing things the way we're doing it now in World War II, we'd still be fighting World War II. Actually, we'd still be preparing to fight World War II probably. But anyway, that's what we have to do, is work a lot closer together and figure this stuff out while we have the chance.
Thank you. And Marv, I know you've done a lot of thinking on this. Would you be willing to close us out with your views?
Sure. I agree with Joanne that the innovation unit's been doing a wonderful job of helping bring us new technology and bringing it together. And interestingly enough, though, I grew up in the Cold War period, spent my whole military career during that Cold War. And your comment or your question about the split between economic and political boundaries getting worse, it seems to me it's getting better. We didn't have an economic relationship with the Soviet Union during the Cold War. We now have an economic relationship with Russia across Europe, and we have an economic relationship around the world with China. And we have China, a country that is yet autocratic, but it's a capitalistic system that's causing them to be rapidly innovative and create large companies that are bringing a lot of things to the world. So I actually see the world moving in different direction in the sense that we are now for the first time on the threshold of having a distributed non-government monetary system that was never in place before. So all of the monies that float around the world in this $500 trillion world will not all be controlled by governments going forward, and so that could have an impact on the world. And as I mentioned earlier, we have technologies that are breaking down the world, like the Starlink satellite system, to everybody within milliseconds. I mean, that's the goal, and that's where they're headed. So I think it's going to change the world, and I think as these tensions that we're watching right now play out, hopefully they don't lead to a real war, and maybe the economic ties that are tying these countries together will help us move forward in a more positive way. Thank you.
Thank you, Marv. I think we've got a few minutes for questions if anybody in the audience would like to make a comment or ask a question to one of the panelists. Come on, the crowd can't be this easy. You all clearly need to attend more stand-up. All right, well, oh, yes, sir.
Sorry about it. I wasn't going to let you get away that easy, so. Hi, Carlton Harris. I'm part of Enterprise Solutions. We're a small business. And my question is really around, there was that common trend that, hey, innovation really does come out of those small businesses. And there's a company that focuses in on advanced tech, and on another hat, the president of a nonprofit, the Cyberbytes Foundation down out of Quantico. What are the best ways that you see that non-traditional companies like us can interact with the innovation offices at a national level, such as yours?
Admiral Rodman, are you willing to take that since that's kind of your forte?
So that's a really great question. I think you're starting to see a little bit of the openings starting to occur. So great example is, U.S. Southern Command's created what, for lack of a better term, I'll call a mission mosh pit in conjunction with Joint Interagency Task Force South. They just did a solicitation through Office of Naval Research for something called Scout, where they ostensibly said, hey, we've got these 4 mission challenges that we're trying to solve. You come down with your idea, and we'll put it to the test in our mission mosh pit this summer to see what plays in Peoria. I think you're going to start to see a lot more of those types of engagements by, I think the collective governments that you see represented here today, to try to scratch that itch and try to get more of that technology that out of the darkness and into the light. And I really want to hit on something that I think Joanne said earlier. The community of practice idea, I think, is just a phenomenal idea. I think if we collectively put our energies together in some of these, key technology domains, 5G, autonomy, artificial intelligence, and machine learning, we really can collectively make a tremendous amount of headway that will make our adversaries' heads spin.
And Lois, you wanted to follow up?
Yeah, I'll add a little bit here. I'll give a shout out to the Royal Navy. We have some Royal Navy representative in the audience here. The Navy has got its own innovation units. The Royal Navy, looking at autonomy, looking at autonomous flight systems, and actually architecture. And I know we've heard a lot about architectures today, but if you live in this area of the United States rather, and San Diego up in LA. We have David over here who looks after some of our business here. We have Nia and Jessica so from our Science Innovation Network and our Technology Network. Please do reach out to them. We will connect you with the right people in the UK to do great things. You know, as I said early on in my offerings, technology doesn't understand geographic or country boundaries. Technology is where bright people come together to deliver and imagine and develop stuff. And if there's one thing we can do to get after our shared security is making sure those technologists can bring their technology outside of those national boundaries to fill those capability gaps that our warfighters have.
Thank you, Lois.
Here I can.
We're gonna have.
Oh, go ahead. Well, I was just going to also say, put in a pitch for AFCEA. It's events like this and industry associations that also bring in tech and bring in interested people, because there's a fairly high barrier to entry for small and medium enterprise to get into defense. And so being able to attend a trade show and see what this is all about is a big deal, and that's one of the ways to attract as well.
Thanks, Bruce. Well, thank you again to all our panelists. Thank you to those who attended. It's good to see we already have some bright points. Now we just need to shine the spotlight on them and water them so that they grow. Enjoy the rest of your time at AFCEA. Mike, did you want to close us out?
I don't know how you wrap this up without saying, Scott, you pulled off a miracle bringing up a panel like this, especially a diverse panel like this. It's just been tremendous. I had a couple of thoughts. First one was alliances are important. And I think that holds across the board. The second one that jumped out at me is that really the bottom line is that our like-minded countries have to work together to develop and build technology solutions that will meet the challenges and maybe battles ahead. It's absolutely critical. And it's a forum like this where that dialogue can continue and strengthen. Thank you very much for a fantastic session. Real quickly, we've got a lunch that's going to be starting here in just about 10 minutes. Admiral Sam Paparo is going to be the speaker, Commander U.S. Pacific Fleet. And then the next session here will start at 1:40 to 2:40. It will be presented by the Marine Corps Communications Electronics School. And the topic is 21st century learning facilitation methods. So thank you again for being here today. Thank you for your support. The Naval Institute is a huge part of this. This is a Navy and AFCEA event all the way through and through. Enjoy your day and be safe. Thank you.